Boktai, the sun is in your hand!
Welcome everyone, I am the Hipster Snek, and this is the Boktai Trilogy. Released from 2003 to 2005, the brainchild of Metal Gear's Hideo Kojima, the Boktai games had one thing that made them really stand out from other Gameboy Advance titles even before you turned the game on. They're physically larger, so much so that they jut out from the top of a classic GBA or the bottom of a GBA SP or DS. There, on the oversized cartridge, is a black solar sensor, the new meta gameplay element that will be your tool to advance to these solar-themed action-RPG titles. Yes, Kojima wanted to put a new meaning to the phrase, go play outside, and so catching some rays was the only way to make meaningful progress. To make sense of all this, we'll start with the plot. The first game opens with an ominous narration, informing us that the time of darkness has fallen over the land, and a dreaded race of undead monsters has risen to power, the Immortals. The Immortals are ageless, they're immune to conventional weapons, and both they and their underlings, even if you succeed in killing them, will regenerate in short order afterward, even if you manage the Herculean task. Enter Django the Solar Boy, heir to the solar gun Gun del Sol, and yes, I know that's not proper Spanish grammar, but that's not important. And his mentor, Master Otenko, a spirit known as a messenger of the sun. We learn that our father, Ringo, was slain at the hands of the Count of Ground-Soaking Blood, a vampire lord who rules over the element of Earth. However, our father's passing was not in vain, as the Count was wounded in their final bout, and it's our chance to deal a decisive blow to the undeadening. And thus, Django departs into the depths of Istrakhan, the land of the dead, to meet the Immortals on their own home turf. Of course, being a brainchild of Kojima's, the game encourages a very stealth-based style of play. Since your enemies are a mixture of undead, automatons, and wild animals, you can opt to sneak past the better part of them if you're inclined. None of them are terribly bright. Or you can use the Gun del Sol and fight your way through, easily able to customize the parts of the gun on the fly to adapt to each opponent you end up facing. You can also play it sneaky, sort of an in-between, tricking unwary zombies to cause them to walk into sunbeams under skylights to watch them go up in a puff of smoke. Or you can cause pairs of golems to roll into each other full speed by knocking on a wall to command their attention. Not only is this hilarious, it's a means by which to level up your gun's lenses, thus upping your elemental damage. Yeah, that's a mechanic the game doesn't really let you know about until it happens, and I feel it's a bit unfair to new players, but hey, that's what New Game Plus is for, right? While we're discussing the mechanics, let's talk more about that solar sensor and your relationship with it. First of all, the energy used by the Gun del Sol comes from the sun, as you might have guessed. You can charge energy anytime Django's outside or under a skylight. Some monsters will even die with contact on the sunlight, like I said. Some pathways will only be crossable if the sunlight is bright, but not too bright, and you'll passively store energy in a solar bank anytime light's hitting the sensor, even if Django's in the dark. However, the game wants you to remember that excessive solar exposure is bad, and there are mechanics that reflect this. First of all, your gun can overheat and will engage a safety lock to prevent its use. This temperature is actually tracked software side, not by the solar sensor, so you can't cheese it. Second, there's a mechanic in certain zones called the solar wind, where a violent gust of, well, wind will try to shove you off, sometimes in a fatal way. The only way to nullify it's having zero sunlight hitting the sensor. Similarly, volcano areas have gouts of flame that react faster as more sunlight hits the beam. Thus, you have to gauge when it's appropriate to have sunlight and when it's better to take a break in the shade. Some areas you'll explore, those labeled undead, are just zones to pass through and get items from. The areas labeled Immortal are the game's big dungeons, with the most complex layouts, puzzles, and traps. You'll have to use all the tricks at your disposal and customize your solar gun accordingly in order to make it through, whereupon you'll get to enter one of the game's boss encounters. While a well-equipped Solar Boy might be able to brute force these encounters, each boss battle is actually set up with a puzzle gimmick of sorts, some of which require no sunlight whatsoever to execute. In fact, several Immortal boss rooms you won't even be given the benefit of a skylight. The giant ice wolf Garmer, for example, forms ice blocks which slide indefinitely until they collide with something, including Garmer himself. By taking advantage of these sorts of tricks, you can then defeat the Immortals and seal them in their coffins, which Django will then take and drag back out, usually via a new route that becomes open once the boss is beaten. This changes your entire experience, as dragging the coffin logically slows you down, and it will try to fight you, periodically shaking, trying to knock you over and escape. Luckily, a few blasts from the solar gun will settle them right back down and allow you to resume. Monsters who see the coffin react to it and try to free their masters, and certain puzzle mechanics are executed by using the coffin as a second weight on switches and other such gimmicks. Once back outside, Django then locks the coffin into place on a massive pile driver, a tool used to massively concentrate the sun's energy to completely annihilate Immortals. The pile driver slowly drains the Immortals' health away as they try to shut both you and the four machines surrounding them down using their dark matter. Keep the heat up and stymie their efforts to escape. Eventually you'll remove the Immortals from this world, effectively clinching the boss fight in a satisfying shootout akin to Django's 1960s namesake. And yes, that's why he drags a coffin behind him on a chain. The only thing this franchise loves more than Nordic myth is spaghetti westerns. From a visual standpoint, the game looks great. It's very stylized, and the areas you visit take advantage of the scenery to really immerse you in the various undead fields or the immortal dungeons. From volcanoes and frozen oceans to castles that spiral straight into the sky and beyond, Boktai just looks amazing. Every enemy is distinct, and even the small shifts in color between elemental varieties tips the player off to the need to shift their strategies. After all, if you see a stark, bright red zombie, you know you're in for a fight, so at a glance you can size up if you're ready to fight or sneak your way past the encounter. As far as the sound is concerned, the better part of background tracks tend to be ambient. A lot of areas are outdoors. When inside a cave or a building, you get the right amount of creepy tones floating around to boggle the player's brain and add a little levity to the cartoonish spookiness that the game's enemies provide. Most importantly is that you can oftentimes realize what enemies are near or on alert by the sounds you hear. The zombies, called Boks, have a high-pitched squeal when they see you, and the golems make a deep, almost hiccup-like sound, and so on. And just as sound works for you, it works for enemies. Some enemies are more sensitive to sound, like mummies who will try to find you based on noises you make rather than sight, and they're actually blind, which is an interesting mechanic unto itself. Simple, subtle, it's perfect for this game. One of the coolest aspects of the first Boktai game was the game tracked how you played. Not only did you get a rank at the end of every mission, but it would monitor if you were spotted by enemies, how many enemies you purified, how many continues you used, and so on. When you complete the game, you'd even be given a password that you were then prompted to put into Konami's website, which still exists by the way, link in the description, and you'd be issued a rank based on how you played the game. In my first run, I got Bishop, because someone's got to purify all the undead horde. In the comments below, tell me what rank you managed to get in your first playthrough. Cooler still, you could then take that password you earned in your best run of the first game, and then plug it into the second game, Boktai 2 Solar Boy Django. This lets you start with a small stat bonus, as Boktai 2 is more RPG oriented with traditional level ups, and some characters will even comment on the old title. This time around, however, Django returns to his hometown, San Miguel, the City of the Sun. There, he finds it overrun with immortals who aim to revive some sort of terrifying beast that will aid their goals of ending life in the universe. There, a vampire accosts Django and manages to not just steal, but use the Gundel Soul, something thought impossible except by those of the Solar Tribe. This mystery looming over them, Django and Otinko meet the enigmatic star child Zazie? I have no idea. But she gives him the Soul Device, a gauntlet that lets Django charge solar energy through melee weapon. This also doubles as a means of making nighttime play more viable, as you can choose to not activate the elemental edge of the Soul Device and fight without expending any energy at all. From the outset, Boktai 2 was designed to be more combat-focused than the first. Stealth elements still work, as you saw before, but Django's custom-ready gun has been replaced by 3 families of weapons. Swords, the fastest and generally most useful in combat, spears, which are good at distance and used in solving several puzzles, and hammers, which are mostly only good for smashing wooden blocks. Django also gets the ability to fuse weapons of the same family together and make stronger ones in a new minigame, Solarsmith, to build up his strength in addition to the aforementioned traditional RPG level up, where you can slot points into your health, energy, strength, or agility. Lastly, you can even equip armors, making Django able to take quite a bit more damage than he could in his last outing, which you'll need as there are fewer dungeons in the first, but each is more devious and better laid out to provide the player a crafty challenge. And while I generally do my best to avoid spoilers on this channel, this bit was spoilered in the game's trailer, so I guess it's fair. A few dungeons in, Django himself gets bitten by a vampire, eventually able to use a mode-changing magic that lets him transform from his Solar Affinity Red Django self to a vampiric dark alter ego, Black Django, which gives him new magic powers, like the ability to turn into bat and thus fly over small pits, a mouse to shrink down and slide through cracks in the walls, or a wolf and regain his HP by chomping on the backs of humanoid monsters. By balancing these light and dark powers, you operate out of San Miguel as a hub, constantly increasing your abilities and equipment and steadily forcing the powers of darkness out of your beloved hometown. saving different NPCs and tackling ever more complex puzzles and battles. And now's a good point to talk about a particular company crossover that Boktai participated in. If you're like me, you might have come across Boktai in the first place courtesy of Mega Man Battle Network, where Django and the Gun Del Sol had cameo appearances and some post-credits content from Battle Network 4 going on. Boktai 2 returns this affectionate shout-out by having a post-credit mission and a two-player versus mode where Django and Mega Man race to defeat Shade Man in each game's respective playstyle. Further, if the Boktai 2 cart was inserted into the Game Boy Advance slot of the Nintendo DS while running Battle Network 5 DS, you'd unlock a special form of Mega Man called Soul Cross. Then things get a bit more Japan exclusive. Mega Man Battle Network 6 physically ran out of room on the cart to include the Boktai event, and then Boktai 3 was never released outside of Japan. Rumor online has it that this entire crossover even happened due to the series directors having kids and or grandkids who are fans of the opposite franchise, and that's pretty adorable if true. And lastly, through the power of fan community translations, we'll talk in brief about Boktai 3 Sabata's Counterattack. At this point, the games were much more heavily action-oriented, including a rather incongruous motorcycle segment that punctuates each stage. I really don't like these very much, at all. However, the overall levels, combat, and puzzles are excellent. Instead of swords, spears, and hammers, Django's given his gun for ranged combat, no real customization this time though, and 3 types of swords, short swords, rapiers, and great swords, which essentially fill the same functions as the previous set. And lastly, the addition of a trance meter, which goes up as you defeat enemies, which lets you enter one of 2 super forms. Soul Django, where his attacks recharge your energy gauge, and Black Django, where his attacks recharge your life. But, spoiler alert, this also acts as a bit of a morality system and affects the ending. That's all I'll say on the matter, but the game doesn't tell you this. Anyway, you can tell the graphics have definitely improved, making the characters more fluid and nuanced. Everything just looks sharp, and the bosses are bigger and crazier than ever. The music in the game has never been better, much more excited in its tone, reminding me just a hair of Konami's other vampire slaying epic Castlevania. And really, that brings our overview of this excellent solar-powered series to its end. The Boktai Trilogy was unjustly overlooked, and frankly, it's amazing to me that that was even possible. With Hideo Kojima's name stamped on it and such an interesting gimmick, to say nothing of the ever-popular Mega Man advertising for it, feels like the series should have been a much bigger hit. I honestly don't know why it never took off. The real devil of it now is it's a victim of its own creativity. Porting a game like this to anything nowadays is effectively impossible without scrapping the solar sensor gimmick as a whole. Sure, the series would see one last hurrah in the form of Lunar Nights on the DS, but that wasn't even the same kind of game. I'll talk about that another time. The important part is that this series of games is amazing. If you have a Game Boy Advance or a DS collecting dust somewhere, track one of these games down, step outside, and see just how immersive the sun-catching game can really be for yourselves. If you liked what you saw here, click subscribe for more of the same. To help the channel grow, go ahead and click the like button and leave a comment down below on what your thoughts on this series are. You can even become a direct sponsor and ensure I have plenty of solar fruit to eat by becoming a patron at my Subscribestar page, subscribestar.com/thehipstersnek. Link in the description. Join me next time as we return to my beloved series of ranching monsters as I discuss the low point of the PS2 trilogy over the next few videos. This is the Hipster Snek, and may the sun be with you.